How's life for you? How's the wildfires in your part of the country? How's global warming in your part of the world? What's the lemonade stand scene like in your neighborhood? I have to be honest. I don't know why I said that, the honest part. Of course I'm honest. I wish we had a better ice cream truck scene at my house. I think what they do in LA is they just go to the parks and they stay there, which makes sense within the framework of capitalism. But I still wish there was a few that went by our house at all. Anyway, what is your favorite hot weather food? What's your favorite food to eat after you've done a DNA test? This podcast is about DNA testing, and more importantly, about the results that happen when you do a DNA test, no matter what kind of food you ate before or after. Okay, I need to stop talking about food. Maybe I'm hungry. Welcome to Everything's Relative podcast. I'm Eve Sturgis. We are exploring the results that thrust people like you and me or someone you know into an existential crisis and maybe a family crisis. Secrets are coming out of the woodwork, and I'm here to talk about it. If you have been following me on Instagram or Facebook at Everything's Relative Podcast, last week you may have seen a post I threw up, and it said, I have 7 spots left for 2023 or something like that. Contact me if you want to share your story. So, hey, I just want to touch base with everybody. You know I've been here all along, right? Don't I mention contacting me at the end of every episode with my email address? Where have you all been? As soon as I said that there were 7 spots left, it was like a wild tidal wave stampede of messages knocked me over from like every platform. Things were coming in. People were on Instagram. People were coming in from Facebook. People were emailing me. Like, now you want to talk? I'm at the end of the season and now you want to talk? It was honestly a really delightful surprise. I got way more than 7 inquiries. I opened up my calendar as much as possible for August. I still couldn't fit everyone in. I'm so sorry if we couldn't make it happen. I'm still debating whether or not I can make it work. Basically arguing with my own resources and like my own personal boundaries. I do want to have everyone, but I am only one person. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. Meg Thomas is my guest for today. She is one of those people that reached out. In fact, folks, you can safely assume, except for 1 or 2 people, every episode for the rest of the season in 2023 is someone who reached out during this, the amazing reach out of summer 2023. So Meg reached out and she got the very first spot. So I was barely even prepared for her. I spent the whole weekend responding to people about getting them scheduled. And anyway, so Meg hopped on. She was gracious about my sort of flustered confusion about who she was. So many people, especially if they contacted me on Instagram, their Instagram handles aren't their names. So then they would schedule a podcast session with me under their name. But so anyway, you get it. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Meg explained it right away who she was. I figured it out. She is the host of a really cool podcast called Emotional Expedition. I will let her explain what it's all about. But she talks about her DNA discovery and like how it fits into this project of hers and where she finds herself in our community. Anyway, you listen to Meg and I. We'll reconvene when it's over, okay? Okay, great. Okay, so every time I point to you, you say something cool, okay? Hey, Dallas, do you want to make a podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money.
Wow, that's awesome.
All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters.
I don't know how it works.
It's okay. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today.
Cool. Can we set it up now?
Yeah, and then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard.
Awesome.
Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch.
Wow, I'll download it right now.
Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, food tastes better Wine tastes sweeter, and I'm a better mother to Dallas. Isn't that true?
Yep.
I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Awesome. Meg Thomas.
I'm so happy to meet you. How are you today?
I'm good. It's so hot where I am. Where are you?
I'm in upstate New York. So we're about to have a heat wave this week, but it's like probably high 80s today.
Okay.
So
yeah, still warm.
You're in California, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where in upstate are you?
Syracuse.
Okay. I've heard of it.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. It's not New York City. It's closer to Canada, so very different than New York City. That's usually the biggest thing we get asked is like, oh, how close are you to the city? I'm like 5-6 hours, so.
Very, very far. Yeah.
Yeah.
I lived up like outside the city a little bit, kind of close to Newburgh. I don't know if you know where that is. And people would say, like, I'd be like, oh, well, I live like up, you go up the 6 and then you take the GW, and people are like, oh, upstate. And I was like, no, not upstate. Like, not
just north of here.
Yeah. Just like an hour.
Slightly
so
north.
Yeah. So different when people say upstate, what they mean. Cool.
Yeah.
So tell me what and how you come to this community, and coming into this, because I feel really lucky and I guess like humored, because so many people signed up when I put out that call for signups. So everybody signed up, and it was like within 24 hours. So I have no idea who's who. And
oh, I love it. Well, I wasn't going, I was 3 hours ahead. So what happened was I woke up in the middle of the night to this like massive lightning storm and thunderstorm, and my dog was going crazy. So normally I would have never like picked up my phone and got on Instagram, but he wasn't calming down. And so I turned to my phone. I'm on Instagram. The only post I saw was your post, and you were somebody I had on my list of people I wanted to pitch to and where I wanted my story. And I'm like, no, like it's midnight. I'm like half awake. I am not sending her a message right now. I put my phone down and I just hear a message, do it now.
Just do it now.
And I was like, okay. And so I get my phone back out and like try to write to you. I am the host of a podcast called The Emotional Expedition.
Great.
I've been doing this podcast for about a year, and it's based on like Brene Brown's work of Atlas of the Heart, of like identifying, labeling the emotion. So every other week I label an emotion, and on the opposite weeks, I have different interviews with people where sharing different modalities of how we can move emotions and trauma through the body. So this is really my sweet spot, which is like, we need the language, we need the foundation, but we also need the ways to move it through the body. I do therapy. I'm, very pro therapy. I do therapy every other week, but I also do yoga and teach breath work and teach yoga and meditation, where it's like, the therapy only gets me so far. I have to move some of it. And my greatest test was finding out my own journey of discovering recently that I was donor conceived. And so it took me, my podcast has been out for, 49-ish episodes, something like that. And it took me to about episode 45 before I was ready to share my story. I share all my stories, but I hadn't shared this one yet. I was still in the process of my own healing journey.
Sure.
And I feel really strongly about that I'm not somebody I always want to share, because I believe that I am one of those people here on earth that are meant to share their vulnerabilities and insecurities and all of that and stories and help people not feel so alone. But I also believe in doing it from an empowered place. And the beginning wasn't very empowering. The beginning was messy. And some people can share from the mess. Absolutely.
When they're messy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Glennon Doyle, Elizabeth Gilbert, like they can share from that direct from the wound. I need it to be like a little bit scabbed over to be able to share from to get there. So yeah, that was how I came into being. And then the next morning when I woke up and went on Instagram, you're like, spots were full. And I was just like, I'm so glad I listened to my intuition in that moment because I would have missed out.
You would have missed out. You would have missed out. Oh, good. Well, I'm so glad to have you. Yeah. So yeah, I think we talked so much in the communities, and then also in outside the DNA discovery communities. It's becoming more and more of a conversation about like where trauma sits in our bodies. And we're telling everybody to read The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. Right. And somatic therapy is sort of like a rising, it's always been around, but like it's just become, people are talking about it. Yeah. Discovering it and talking about it more and more. So that makes so much sense that you would be one of the people that's helping like bridge that gap, because we can all read Body Keeps the Score.
Some of us, I mean, it's a hard read.
I was going to say, we may or may not actually recommend that book.
Yeah.
For different reasons. But it's an easy one to reference.
Yes. And there's so much truth in it, like so much, but it was one of those that it took me, reading, I would read 10 to 15 pages a day and like just try and integrate it first thing in the morning and then go back. And then, so it was one of those that I couldn't just sit and read cover to cover. It took me longer to understand it at that level. But that's kind of what I think of my podcast is like Atlas of the Heart meets The Body Keeps the Score with some of my magic sprinkled in there.
Yeah. That's good. It's a good pitch. So you were already doing the podcast.
Yes.
And how far into the podcast were you when you discovered you were donor conceived?
I had discovered actually before I started the podcast.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I knew I've been working through the emotions of Atlas of the Heart, like kind of in the order of the book she presents it, how Brene Brown presents it. And so I knew I kept feeling like, when I get to betrayal, that's the one, like that's the emotion. But what really happened was I haven't even got to betrayal. I'm only like on chapter 3 because I've just been like taking my time with this. But I started to get the feeling in this past April, that the time was now, that I was ready to share my story. And then once I found out, started seeing like, oh, it's International Donor Conception Awareness Day, I was like, okay, I'm going to share it that week. And so that was when I chose to share it. But I actually started to piece things out. The first little seedling I had was 4 years ago.
Okay.
Do you want me to dive in?
Walk me through it. What happened 4 years ago?
Okay. So I have been struggling to conceive, and I have just been on a journey of my own fertility and IVF, and being somebody who's very holistic and also having had medical trauma in the past. Like there was a lot of reasons why it took me a while to actually go for help in the fertility community. And so I was doing my first retrieval. And when you do a retrieval, you're under anesthesia. My husband switches back between nights and days when he works, and he happened to be, it's based on your own schedule. It's based on your body's cycle.
Right.
So you can't really control those things. So it fell when he was working nights. And so he brought me to the clinic, got me set up. He'd been working all night, just came home, got me and brought me there. And then my mom was going to pick me up from the procedure and drive me home. Because of the anesthesia, you can't drive home after. So you can't drive yourself home. So we get in the car, and I mean, I walk out of the procedure room and they let you dress yourself. I put my sweater on backwards and inside out. Like, this is the kind of state. I just share this because like, this is the mental state that I was in.
This is why you can't drive.
Yeah, this is why you cannot operate a vehicle. And so I find my way to my mom's car. I get into her car and I'm out. I am spaced out, completely spaced out, driving home. And she says to me, at this point, I've already been through multiple IUIs. I've been in the fertility world for a few years at this point, I think 2 years, and never had she ever said one word to me about, your dad and I struggled to conceive.
Never mentioned it.
Never. And so
She just was like,
yeah, never. Right. And this is the power of shame. What I understand shame to be is the desire to keep this a secret because of, shame needs secrecy and judgment to thrive. And so my mom's shame was bigger than her desire to connect with me, which is hard. Like that's really a really hard thing. And so she mentions, oh, your dad and I did an IUI. And I mean, I'm so out of it. She gets me home, puts me into bed, and then the next day, I think I like remember this sentence happening at some point, and I wasn't able to respond.
Just in case anybody doesn't know, what does IUI stand for?
So IUI is when the if it is in a heterosexual relationship, or a sperm donor, in that case, it's when the sperm is inseminated in the woman, and it is different than IVF. IVF is a retrieval of the follicles, which then are the eggs, and then get combined with the sperm, which then makes it an embryo. So IUI, very often for insurances, that's like the first step that they will recommend that you do. And so the next day, I've been in the fertility world long enough that I am like, something is here, right? Where I know my chances in 2021 of an IUI working with my partner's sperm is like a 20% chance. Like, honestly, I would have never even done it if it wasn't for insurance being like, this is the first thing you have to do. So I knew this information. So even though she'd never said like your donor conceived, anything like this, and I sat on it for 1 year. I sat on this sentence for 1 year, just going back and forth and back and forth.
You never followed up with her at all about it? Like any sort of just like, hey, touching
Yeah,
base.
we don't talk. The reason I host a podcast called Emotional Expedition is because I've had to learn as an adult how to talk about emotions. So I grew up in a family where we just don't talk about your emotions. So if this was true, though, if this was true, it would mean I would be breaking my own heart. I had to wait until I was brave enough to break my own heart. My dad died when I was 5 years old, and I was the world to him, and he was the world to me. And I have spent my whole life trying to stay connected to him in whatever ways that meant. So I spent, this 1 year just alone thinking about what this would mean. All of the times where it's like, oh, you sweat a lot, you must be a Thomas. Like, oh, you like to eat cheese, you must be a Thomas. Like, my dad died when I was 5. So anything I could grasp onto, I did. And in order this is the biggest heartbreak I've ever had to experience in my life, where it was to sever that connection of what that meant to be connected to him by blood, and not just at this point in a spiritual sense. And so a year later, I was about to go into another fertility procedure, and who knows why it was it was 1 week before this surgery that I was to have. And I had the courage, and I called her, and I paced and paced around my living room until I finally said, I just need you to tell me, is Dad my biological dad? And she said no. And of so many stories that I've heard, I am so grateful she told me the truth in that moment. Like, I know now, I've heard many stories where that's not always the case. And so I am grateful for that moment of like, yeah, what you suspected is true.
How long did you stay on the phone with her after she said no?
Only it took me about 47 minutes to get the courage to ask the question, which was a very unusually long conversation for me on the phone with her. And after, it was probably two things happened. First was the only questions that had come to mind were, is my dad my biological dad? I didn't know how many other boxes it was going to open for me. Like, who knew,
Right.
who in the family knew, and all of those kind of moments.
When you say you don't know, did you suspect boxes would open, but you didn't know how many? Or do you mean you didn't know boxes would open?
I think my mind protected me for 1 year. The only question that was just like over and over is dad your biological dad? And a part of me already knew that once that seed was planted, I knew the chances were so slim, were absolutely so slim. And so at the after was probably 5 minutes because my mom is like a rock star at, financially helping me with anything about physically. If I had to flee my house or the country in the middle of the night, like she'd be there and figure it out. But what I have learned is she cannot hold me emotionally. And I knew in that moment my heart was breaking, and I knew that she wasn't a safe space for that, and that I had to get off the phone. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really eloquent description of what that experience could be and what it means to people to find out they're not blood related. And I think you have the added poignancy of having lost your dad, which doesn't mean that it's worse or more, but it certainly drives home the point.
Yeah.
I think in a way that is like the illustration of that, of how important these things are. The truth is, how important the truth is, really, like, it really drives it home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, it doesn't matter why you like cheese, no,
exactly. I think it's a human thing.
Mm-hmm, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I spent the next like year and a half with just, a close inner circle of knowing. I got myself back in therapy at that time, and I went through so much grief. Like I grieved my dad all over again, and I didn't even know that that was possible. And my family, like my mom and my aunt, like it was just like, I don't understand why this is a big deal. Like, just get over it already. Cause I even had to like step back from my mom, because it was like, we never talked about it again. And it was uncomfortable to bring it up or try to be like, I'm struggling here. And so it was just like people were telling me to nothing has changed. Right. And it wasn't until in that year and a half period of grieving and doing this really inner work, I heard a podcast with Danny Shapiro, and I was like, permission granted.
Right.
Like, that is how I feel. Like, I didn't understand. Like, I was like, what? Everyone's telling me this isn't a big deal. Everyone's telling me nothing has changed. Everyone's telling me my dad is still my dad, my, half sister and half brother, who now are my stepsister and stepbrother. Like, nothing's changed, right? It's like, but at the same time, I felt nothing had changed. My dad is my dad and will always be my dad. But this other part of me had changed, and it was okay that I was feeling that. And so I immediately, listened to everything I could with Danny Shapiro and read Inheritance. And I just felt seen in a way that I hadn't felt yet on the journey. And it's also a part of how I ended up creating my own podcast, was because I just wanted other people to not feel so alone, not in relation just to be donor conceived in that way, but in relation to learning as an adult label and identify and know what it is we're feeling.
Absolutely. I also come from a place of like emotional vocabulary learning. I got emotional vocabulary deficit is, where I think, and that was something I didn't know until I was in therapy with my daughter. She was actually in therapy, my older one, and her therapist had a session with me, and she kept asking me to describe things. And to me, it felt like I was describing them. But she mentioned like, okay, so, nicely and something, but it was like, so emotional vocabulary could be something that I could come up with, like, I felt weird. It was weird. I specifically remember that word coming up a lot in my descriptions. And so that's become like a goal of mine as well, is to learn about words for emotion. And
Atlas of the Heart. Atlas of the Heart. That's the best book for it.
Yeah, it's so good. And it's just so good to know. And I give all my writing classes, they all get an emotion wheel. And anytime I'm anywhere where there's a check-in, you need to be able to identify an emotion. We always debate whether tired is an emotion. I would say, I argue no.
It's not in Brené's list of emotions, but I can see how it feels. That we know what it feels like. If you say I'm tired, what that feels like.
Well, and semantically, body. I feel fill in the blank. I feel tired is a correct sentence. And so whenever it gets brought up and someone says that, I'm always like, like,
let's go deeper.
I don't know. So that is really interesting. And with your Thomas side of the family, your paternal side, had you maintained a relationship with them your whole life?
Yeah.
So this was a genetic disconnect to a whole legacy of people, not just this man from when you were 5.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm so grateful for that conversation. I was nervous they live out in Cape Cod, and I had a Zoom call with them to tell them. And they're, quite a few years older than I am. And
it was your siblings or your?
Yeah, my half sister and half brother, who then became the stepsister and stepbrother. And they were like, oh, yeah, Meg, like nothing's changed. Like, okay, like I was so nervous to have that conversation. But then it was like, of course, well, almost 40 years of my life is not based on just blood. Like,
right. Thank
so
goodness.
Yeah. And they didn't know. And so my mom's side of the family all knew, like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and even my stepdad, who came in later in the game. And it's like, oh, so like, those are the moments that are hard. Like, he had more of a right to know than I did. And I understand, having a better understanding. A part of my process was learning more about this journey of what it was like in the early 80s. I was born in 1983, so I was conceived in 1982, and what that looked like in a small town in, rural New Hampshire. And so I've gotten some information about how that process was, in understanding why my mom and dad made the choice to not tell me. But at some point, I believe that I had a right to know. And so, I wish my mom had told me, and I wish I didn't find out the way that I did.
Sure.
But, what was a little bit woo, which I know you can go there after listening to your podcast.
100%. Give it to me. Give me all the cosmic magic.
An astrologer, about maybe a year prior to me hearing that sentence from my mom, said, and I have it recorded because I had recorded this session with him, and within the first 5 minutes of having this session with this astrologer, he said, oh, you were born on a full moon in Scorpio, and there's a family secret surrounding your birth, and you will be the one to uncover it.
What?
Yes.
Hold on, I gotta scream. My goosebumps are all over my body. Okay.
Oh yeah. And so I I went to my mom and like asked like little things of like, what was going on with you and dad at that
Like, so
time?
mom, Scorpio, full moon, like talk to me.
Anything.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So no, I did not say Scorpio full moon, but I tried to like ask little pulling at the threads, like, what was it like? How did you feel around the time I was, conceived and when you were pregnant? Was anything going on? And nothing.
Has she been able to talk about that in retrospect?
No, I don't even know if she remembers that moment. Yeah.
I'm like, get your mom on the phone right
Yeah.
now. I need to know if at the time she was going like, shit. Here, she knows. Or if she just was like, nope.
And that's, any insight you have on this as well, because I know you know this in a way, so many different stories than I have experienced, but my mom has not wanted to be a part of the healing journey of this. And I think there's still her own shame. I think this was a secret she didn't ever want uncovered. And then here she has me, this, Gemini daughter with a Scorpio moon sign who's like, oh, yeah, well, not only am I somebody once I understand something new and have integrated, I need to share it with the world.
Yeah, I can relate to that pretty like point for point.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah, my parents are like, why?
Why are you like this? Yeah. It's been, for me, I'm a coach for women going through fertility treatments, and how I feel about coaching women on that journey is these really challenging times can also be really pivotal moments of transformation and growth. And there's a part of me that's very sad that my mom this could have been a beautiful moment for us to go through this together. But I've felt very alone in the process of going through my own healing and trying to understand what that looks like. And just like my fertility journey, I have gone through this slow, like at a turtle's pace, and that's what's right for me. And so after probably a year and a half of that grieving process, last July, so a year ago, I put myself in 23andMe. And so I can imagine it's pretty jarring for the people that find out via 23andMe and don't have any of that processing and integration time. Because at that time, I had an idea. You're probably opening the door to other siblings that you've never known about.
I had that experience. Like when I did, there's an episode I do with Jules Dixon Jackson from Cut Off Jeans. And I already knew, like I'm way into my journey. And then I did Ancestry with her. And to see my bio data at the top of that, list, to suddenly get like a new level of understanding of what the DNA test shock is like the people that doing it for fun. Like I had a whole, it was really like, speaking of emotional vocabulary, I'm not sure I have the words for what kind of trip it was. Like it was weird. But like it was very overwhelming. Like I could feel my understanding like drop. I could feel like a heaviness and a depth of my experience with the community drop, like sort of sink in a little bit of like, oh, there he is. His face was there. Yeah, really, really wild. So I feel you that it's a little bit different to know, but wow, what a like peek into that kind of experience.
Yeah, I sat on that for a little bit too. I think I sat probably 2 weeks on having the connections there, but not hitting connect with anyone. So it was like, and I think this is okay. Like if you're listening to this and you're on your journey and you have moments of pause, that's okay. Like you can allow yourself that space to integrate more fully and then go to the next step or the next phase. And like you said, for so many of us that just find out just directly 23andMe, that is a whole lot to find out at one time. Because for me, I was much more open to the idea of siblings than I was that this donor existed in my mind.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh my gosh, the story I created. So the day I got the 23andMe, I was 100% convinced he was dead. There was no way that this man was still alive. And so that was one of the stories I created to protect myself.
Right. That was just a narrative that worked for you.
I was like, okay, like I'm open.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to finding siblings, but I am not open to him being alive and my dad being dead.
There's really something about a 5-year-old girl having lost her dad being like, no, I lost my dad. And so there's no other dad. Like you can just see that part of your mind, just
it's like
making that make sense. Like your inner 5-year-old that lost her dad. Like that is, I have my daughter just turned 4 and my other guy's 7. Like I'm very familiar with like what how 5-year-olds
think
process, and you can just see her inside you right now just saying like, nope, that doesn't make sense. Like, but he died. Dads die when you're 5.
And also with siblings, you can have more than one sibling in your life. And so the idea that there were more siblings, I was like, okay, like I'm okay with that. My biggest fear was there were too many of us. I don't know what the number too many was, but in my mind, my biggest fear going into 23andMe was like, there's going to be 100 of us. How many is there? And what is too many? But it didn't feel like it was taking anything away from the siblings I already have by gaining more siblings. But if this man was alive and existed and he's a real person, according to Instagram, like, then that feels like it's taking something away from my dad, which it isn't. It isn't, but it feels that way of like, okay, like, and you're here and my dad's not. So yeah, it was really,
I don't feel that way as directly as you, because the man that raised me is still alive. But there is like a special kind of pain about when I open those 23andMe and Ancestry.com and he's not on there. There's a void.
I kept looking for his name.
Yeah.
Like, let it be wrong.
I have other small things that I really connect with as far as being like, oh, that's from my dad. And I still think that and then go, nope, no, it is not. But yeah, it's the void that becomes painful.
Yeah. That's a good way of the void. Yeah. Of explaining that feeling. And he wasn't in 23andMe. So I couldn't see him. I didn't know who he was and or if he was alive. I did not find out that information until I connected with one of the siblings who she was like, I've got all the answers to all the questions you didn't even know that you have yet. And I was like, okay. And it's our first phone call together. And I was like, I was ready to know about her, but I wasn't ready to know about him yet, but she had done the detective work.
So she was also donor conceived?
She was. And so there are 5 of us, including me, in 23andMe. And I have met 2 of them. And in the last year, so I put myself in last July, and in the last year, I have met 2 of them and started to build relationships with 2 of them. And everyone else, I'm also very cognizant of everyone else is in their own journey and goes through this in their own way. And so I am grateful to have had at least one person to connect through this. I feel deeply grateful for that, because I think it would be harder to not have somebody. At least I have somebody to be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is where I'm at. And for the first time, it was like, I've always been a leader. And it felt like they were like, yeah, we've already been here. We've been waiting for you and we've got you. Like, and they were so excited. My half sister, Candace, that first phone call, she was like, I get so excited anytime there's somebody new in 23andMe. And I was like, I was so nervous about how many people were in there, because I didn't want a lot. I didn't want it to be one of those wild and big numbers, but they were like 1980 and I was 1982. So back then it was fresh sperm.
Mm-hmm.
And because I now am in the fertility world, fresh sperm, you only have like a 30-minute shelf life.
Small window. Yeah.
If we collect my husband's sperm at home, you can only live a certain amount of miles away from the clinic to get it there, and I like have to put the cup skin to skin kind of situation to keep it warm, and you get it there. And so fresh sperm is not like their numbers are so much more limited. And then once they've evolved into frozen sperm, then it's like one vial can be separated so many times. And that's when the numbers started to really increase.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in 1982, especially I would imagine in a rural place or in New Hampshire, you said there, it's not some of these when you hear about the serial donors or like the major donors, it's like, yeah, they lived right next door to a donation place in New York City that was open 24/7 or something. Yes. It makes it seem more possible. Okay.
And these were back then, it was medical students only. And lucky for, there have been some moments where I was like, okay, all right, if this was to happen, there's some best case scenarios. It was an Ivy League college. It was Dartmouth Medical School. And so these men had to have been pretty smart to have gotten into the medical program. And with it being fresh sperm, the numbers were lower as well.
The odds were in your favor.
Yeah. And then when I was 16, my lungs started spontaneously collapsing. And it's called they just labeled it like a spontaneous pneumothorax. Oh. I remember being in the hospital for the first time and they were like, oh, well, I mean, we usually see this in tall, thin males. And I was like, well, I'm a 16-year-old female, so I don't really know how this is helpful information.
How tall are you?
I am 5'7".
Okay, not that tall.
So just average, right? Mm-hmm. And I was an athlete, so I was tall and thin, but nothing out of the ordinary. And I remember them saying, oh, does anyone in your family have this? No, no one. I had never experienced anyone else ever having this. I had surgery on that first lung at 16, and then I continued to have my lungs collapse, and then it started to almost be in concert with like my menstrual cycle. Like I started to get pain in relation to the estrogen and the different the ride you go on with your hormones each month.
I mean, that'll put a new twist on your PMS. Like, I have a headache. Oh yeah, my lungs collapse.
Yeah. So I never had another like full collapse at the level where I needed surgery until I was 22 on the other lung. And so both of them now have staples in them and they can't really fully collapse anymore because they're like held by these staples. But it's something that has affected my whole life. Like it's still to this day, especially in relation to my menstrual cycle and trying to get pregnant and things like that. And no one's ever been able to tell me anything more about this. Like it's just, I go to a pulmonologist who's like, yeah, I've never seen this in my entire career. Like it's just a very rare thing. And it's affected my life in many different ways throughout the years. And so my first phone call, well, it was a text message. It started out with my half brother, Andrew. I texted, hey, I'm going to be, out in Denver. He lives out in like Fort Collins. And I said, hey, I'm going to be in Denver in January for this conference. And I love to ski, but I have to get there. I have to get acclimated to the elevation change because it's a big change from where I live. So I'll probably ski at the end of my trip. Like where, what do you recommend? Where do you go? And he says, wait a sec, can I call you? And I was like, yeah. Okay.
You're like, this is going to be really serious about skiing.
Yeah. Our first phone call, he says, tell me about your lungs. And I started to tell him about when it started happening. And he said, mine started when I was 17 and he had never met another human that had this. And within 1 hour of getting off that phone call, my lens changed. Like the lens at which I view the world changed. And I was able to Google this genetic disorder. I was able to pinpoint the actual gene it affects. And I was also able to read that it will be passed on. And so somebody going through fertility treatments, this is like valuable information for me of using my own eggs. It will be passed on, and 40% of the time it will show up.
Wow, that's a lot.
And so those are the moments where it was like he and I were both going through the same exact thing in different parts of the country and never had a clue, that this affect, this was a genetic thing.
And I'm so glad you're both alive and well. I think sometimes when people are bringing up why medical history is important and full transparency and health records within the donor conceived community and all the DNA discovery community, but we sometimes bring up really like dramatic, terminal, fatal, that we bring up the most dramatic illnesses, genetic things but yours is such an excellent example of why it doesn't have to be Huntington's or something, which comes up a lot.
Yeah.
It can be less terminal, but still so important to someone's history and understanding. And wow, what it would have been to have a connection with someone else at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's experienced this.
And for children, for future children. Wow.
Yeah.
Good heads up. Good heads up.
Right. Exactly. It's like, okay, well, do I want to use my own eggs? What does that look like? And I'll be honest, like the more I am in this donor conceived world, and I coach, this is what I do is I coach women going through fertility treatments. And I am, wherever they are feeling called to, I support them in that. So I'm never there to shame them in any direction that they're choosing, but I am there to offer, like, do you want some more information about what this could look like and what it feels like for your child to start to have more and more siblings in the world, and what's going on, in relation to donor sperm and even donor embryos at this point and donor eggs. Is these numbers are real. Like these numbers are getting bigger and bigger. I went directly to the owner of the fertility clinic that I go to and said, like, how are we regulated? And he said, we make that as an internal decision within our clinic. And there is no, New York State or federal regulation. There's bits and pieces that are starting to come, which are still not near where they need to be. But as a clinic, like they create their own code of ethics.
Cool life. We could all just create our own code of ethics. Yeah.
I want people to be empowered by their decisions and to understand it. I recently was hosting a retreat. I was co-hosting a retreat, like a day retreat for single moms and single moms who have special needs. And I shared my story, which had I not come out publicly in April about my story, I don't know as if I'd be sharing my story, but now there's that freedom too, because I have put it out there. And so I was sharing my story. Everybody leaves, the retreat day's over. And this one woman comes up to me after and she's like, can I talk with you? And I said, absolutely. And so we sit down and she said, my 16-year-old daughter just found out, not from me, that she's donor conceived. And it was an open process. So they were always going to find out at 18, and she was always going to tell her daughter at 18. But now, of course, like a family member or a friend said something. And so now she has this 16-year-old who's just crushed, and she had no resources, like I don't know where to go and what to do right now. And I thought waiting till 18 was the right thing because I'd have more information at that time to give her. And I just sat with her, and it was one of those moments like, this is why I'm telling my story, because I can help you. I can show you, go listen to this podcast, read this, do this. Like, these are the things I wish my mom had done. You still have that chance. And I gave her my phone number and email and was like, either of you, like, call me anytime. I can help. So
isn't that wild to think of? This information is not secret, but it is so hard to find. And once you're holding it, like, how lovely and lucky and strange for that woman to have been in that situation. Like, oh, do you know anyone that happens to have all the resources?
This is the work you and I are called to do.
Yeah. So tell me more about your podcast. Do you have guests on your podcast, or you talk you talk the most? Is what I was going to say.
I talk the most.
Do you talk the most? Do you do all the talking?
I do. Eve, I talk the most. I do talk
the most on your podcast.
That's why I give myself every other week a solo episode, just so I can be the one who talks the most.
Just remember who's really important here.
Yeah. So, so then every other week it's either hearing people's stories or it's different healing modalities. It's, somatic breath work. It is like EFT tapping. It is writing. It's just different ways. My goal with the podcast is there are thousands of ways of healing. None, not all of these are going to resonate, but just if one resonates, I hope you connect with it and do something with it. So if you hear a podcast about tapping and it really connects with you, so I just bring on all different types of healers or people with stories who want to share their story as well. And I believe so deeply in the power of storytelling, and that all we really want is to be seen. And so for me, that moment with Danny Shapiro, I was like, finally, someone is saying, yes, me too. Like, I feel that way too. And I really, truly believe that's what you're doing. Like, this is, now that I have more resources and know of your podcast, it's like, that's what you're doing.
And have you had anybody, thus far in your storytelling that has come with other DNA surprises?
Nope. I just launched my own story in April, at the end of April. And then a dear friend who was another podcaster who was adopted, she interviewed me and another woman with her. They interviewed me, but she was an adoptee. And so, which was also a transracial adoptee. So she was biracial and then adopted into another race. So she had 3 different race identities happening. And so I had her come on after and talk about her identity journey. And now it's something I am deeply into exploring more and more about identity in all different forms and what that really looks like, and the repercussions of not standing in our identity, whether it's race or sexuality or DNA related. I think all of these have implications on the body. Yeah,
100%. 100%. So have you become, sort of like become a part of any of the like donor conceived community?
I'm not really in any Facebook groups or anything. I've found, a few people like yourself and Jana Rupnow on Instagram, and started being able to listen to podcasts and do a little more research in that way. I think I might have been in a Facebook group right in the beginning, and it reminded me of some similar energies of the fertility community type of open Facebook groups that can have a lot of different energies going on. And sometimes that can be too much for me. So I kind of recognize that those don't always feel like the safest spaces for me. And I'm so grateful. And I know there are many good ones out there and that people do get value out of them. And so I am very interested in knowing more about how we can make this, because I think I come at it from somebody going through fertility treatments and knowing for myself that the desire to become pregnant is so big. It's so big. And I really do believe that we need more education in these couples or these single mamas by choice. Like there needs to be more education in what this really looks like and what the long-term experiences are and what the possibilities are. Because I have clients that I'm coaching that have bought sperm online, had it delivered to their house. Like these are things that are happening now is you can literally order sperm online and have it delivered. And whether you use some form of inseminating it to yourself or bringing it somewhere to do, I mean, it's wild. And so the ease at which these things can happen has gotten dramatically easier. However, there's still a lack of transparency that exists around how many places is this being used? So many clinics are now shipping sperm to other countries. So it's like, we're not even talking about the United States anymore. We're talking about all of these other countries. And we have places like Canada and Australia who, theirs was based on this whole altruistic type of thing where you couldn't get paid to donate sperm. So then therefore there's only a handful of donors in their system. So what do? They buy it from other countries.
Right. Because reach out.
Yeah.
No problem.
So it's like all of those kinds of things. And I don't believe we totally know all the emotional effects that it has. And with meeting these two siblings, there were things in me that made sense that have never made sense before. It was like my half brother and I, we look at the world in such a similar way. And I watch him answer a question and he would answer it the same way I would answer it. And I was like, interesting. Okay. And then we have been able to see through the power of Instagram that our donor has 3 children as well. So there's 8 of us. Of the 8 of us so far that I can see, 5 of us have been photographers.
Wow.
I'm not saying artists.
Yeah,
I'm saying photographers. Like, how is that?
That's so specific.
Yeah, I built a wedding photography business for 13 years. That was the first business I ever built. My donor's son is a wedding photographer. One of his other sons is a photographer. And it's like, okay, so there's moments like that that are really powerful sense of belonging and just understanding yourself in a new way. And at the same time, there's just other moments that are really challenging of navigating this within your family, because to me, it has felt like my half brother just came here with his family and my mom didn't want to meet them. And those are moments that make me really sad, where it's like, it doesn't have to be a pie. Meaning my love is not a pie. And if I give you one slice and I give this person one slice, then it takes away, there's less for you. That's not the world I live in. That's not the world of scarcity. Like, I live in the world of abundance, which is, as long as these people continue to add more to my life, like, they'll be a part of my life. And it is adding something, because I'm starting to understand parts of myself are being mirrored back to me that I've never seen. And so, no, I'm not ready to reach out to the donor yet. But I think that will be my next step at some point. But that one is a much harder step for me. And the initial feeling that I had was anger towards him. And I didn't really understand, like, why am I feeling so angry? And people around me were saying, like, oh, he did this wonderful thing. And, they gave our family this opportunity. And it's like, yeah, but there was so much anger. And I think a lot of it came from that place of, he gets to be alive and my dad's not here. And so I think it was triggering a lot of my own unprocessed grief and those moments. And now I have moved, because I also believe in ancestral healing and healing the body. And so I no longer refer to him as the donor. Like I refer to him by his first name, which by some twist of irony is Thomas. And so that was a challenge. I was like, really, of all the names you're making me get comfortable with, is like, to the point, like when I got married, I didn't take my husband's name. That's how much I wanted to stay connected to my dad. Yeah. Nope. My last name is not my husband's last name.
Mm-hmm. Like Thomas tried and true.
I made that, right? I just made that decision, 13 years ago when I got married, and never knew that I'd be in this place, and learning to have this acceptance and for this man, Thomas, who gave me life and gave me a lot of really amazing qualities I have about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important to remember everybody's working through it at their own pace. And even the online support groups, people are coming in at different places in their own journey with their own experience of emotions.
And I'd love your opinion on this. I think what I get hung up about on some of the energy of that is, we can choose to let this be a moment of transformation, or we can stay stuck as a victim. And I think that's what I get really turned off by, like the people that are choosing to stay stuck in that victim loop. Do you notice that as well?
Oh, I absolutely noticed that. I noticed that. And yeah, I try to keep like my heart open to people who don't know anything else except like black or white thinking, and but that can be alienating to people coming in, looking for different perspective and empathy from different experiences. So remind me again of the name of your podcast. Let's make sure everybody hears it.
Yep. It's The Emotional Expedition with Meg Thomas.
And it's available everywhere podcasts are heard.
Everywhere podcasts are heard.
And do you have a website or an Instagram people could connect with you?
Yep. It's at emotional_expedition. And my website is meganthomas.com. Or I also own emotionalexpedition.com as well. So they all go to the same place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mine do too.
You know the drill.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Was there anything else that I should have asked you or touched base about? You think? That was really wonderful. I hope that you keep in touch with, I hope you, keep in touch with me, or, keep in communication with like your own journey and if you do reach out to your donor and what it's like.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. You're an interesting, I don't want to say like case study, like I'm looking at you under a microscope. I guess it's kind of like you're moving through this at your own pace, the way that you want. And you're someone that has worked on getting to know yourself and being comfortable with that, and working with your intuition. Those in tandem can work really well for sort of a quest, like a single person's quest.
Yeah.
Which is it's fairly unique. Not everybody can do that.
Thank you.
So keep me posted.
I will. Thank you. And I'm really, really grateful for you and what you're doing for this community.
Oh my gosh. It was just so cool. It was just so great to have you. I'm so glad you had that moment of just do it now.
I was like, okay. And you just responded, yes, yes, yes. I was like, okay. All right, universe. All right, we're in.
It was so great talking to you, Meg. I'm so glad that happened so fast.
Thank you, Eve. So nice. I want to meet you in person.
Yeah,
I'm like, you are my people.
Oh, so. Let's do it. Yeah. I feel it. I feel it really good.
Yeah.
I feel it really
All
good.
Right. Me too. Me too.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, Meg.
You too.
Bye.
Meg's podcast really does sound fantastic. I am a huge fan of Brené Brown. And I believe that High Earth Hope and Healing Book Club is doing Atlas of the Heart right now. So it feels like this podcast, Meg's podcast, and that book club could be a really cool companion piece. Are you a part of Everything's Relative podcast in all the ways that you could be? Are you following me on the socials at Everything's Relative Podcast? Have you visited the website to check out the massive collection of resources I've accrued over time? It's www.everythingsrelativepodcast.com. Are you enjoying yourself or hate listening because you've already subscribed? Oh, time for a review of the week. I'm so glad you asked for it. This person wrote, one long sentence. Absolutely love Eve and her podcast. Thank you, Eve, for doing the podcast. Well, thank you, person, for taking 45 seconds to write that friendly and enthusiastic review. I dare you listeners to write one better than that. Anyway, okay, I'll be back next week for sure, because I have so many guests in the next 4 weeks that I'll be trying to hammer these puppies out quickly so I don't drown. So come back. I will be here. We're going to go way past 100 episodes, but we're close. We're close to the 100th. I'm very excited. In the meantime, try some cucumbers in your smoothies. Think about what you can do to help global warming. Feed the cat. This is Everything's Relative Podcast. I'm Eve Sturgis. Bye-bye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Eve Sturgis and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.